My name is Nora, and this is the story of a name that still echoes in my heart, though I haven't heard it spoken in years. It's a quiet story, but its silence is louder than words. Sometimes, the quietest things leave the deepest marks. I wasn't always like this. Before Ethan, I was someone who believed that life had a pattern, a rhythm. I could always find comfort in the predictable. I worked as a copywriter in a small advertising agency where I spent my days thinking of the perfect phrases, the cleverest ideas, and the most beautiful words to sell things. But selling feelings wasn't like selling a product. The emotions you gave away didn't always come back to you. And then there was Ethan. I remember the first time I saw him. It wasn't anything special. He was standing by the river, holding a paintbrush, his focus so intense that I almost didn't want to disturb him. I was just walking home from the office, my heels clicking softly against the cobblestone streets. I had passed his art studio many times before, but on that day, something about the way the sunlight caught the golden hues of the canvas stopped me. He turned around, and for the first time, our eyes met. I don't know what it was that drew me to him. Maybe it was the way he held the brush with such grace, or the way his eyes seemed to reflect the world in a way I had never seen. He had this calmness about him, a quiet confidence that I admired instantly. He smiled, and I felt something shift inside me. "Do you paint too?" he asked, his voice soft but warm. I laughed lightly, shaking my head. "No, I'm a writer. I work in an office, mostly writing words that sell things." "Words are powerful," he said, his gaze thoughtful. "But paintings are more honest." That was the beginning of it. A simple conversation. An exchange of words that would later become the foundation of something much more complex. From that first moment, something inside me shifted. I began to walk by Ethan's studio more often. At first, I told myself it was just curiosity. But it was. It was something deeper. Every time I saw him, painting with such dedication, something inside me wanted to stay longer, to listen more, to understand him better. He noticed me too. At first, it was just a casual wave when I passed by. But soon, he would stop what he was doing and come to talk to me. "Isn't the world strange?" he asked one evening, his paint-smeared hands holding a half-finished canvas. We pass by each other every day, but it's only when you stop that you really see it. I laughed. "I guess I've never really stopped to look." "I can teach you to see," he said, with that playful smile of his. "But you have to be willing to let go of what you think you know." It wasn't long before I started to spend hours at the studio, watching him work. He painted landscapes, mostly deserts, that seemed endless, forests that were always on the verge of dusk. His work was full of melancholy, yet there was always a glimmer of hope in the way he used color. I didn't understand much about art, but I understood him. He told me about the stories behind each painting, how a desert sunrise reminded him of the first time he saw the ocean, how the darkness in a forest symbolized the parts of us we kept hidden from the world. His paintings weren't just images, they were pieces of his soul. Each stroke, each color, was a piece of him. We began to talk more about ourselves, and somewhere between stories and laughter, I realized I was falling in love with him. It wasn't a dramatic thing. It was simple. I just wanted to be around him. I wanted to know more, to understand him, to see the world through his eyes. It was one evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting everything in a golden light, that he asked me a question that would change everything. Nora, do you ever think about the future? I paused. It wasn't something I often thought about. I was always so focused on the here and now. The future seemed like something too far to worry about. I suppose I don't, I said slowly, my voice soft. I think about it all the time, he said, his eyes looking distant for a moment, as if lost in a dream. I think about what comes after, about where I'll be, and who I'll be with. And who will you be with? I asked, unable to stop myself. He smiled, a little wistful. I don't know, but I think I want to share it with someone who understands the quiet parts of me. There was a long pause as we looked at each other. The golden light around us seemed to deepen, wrapping itself around the moment. I think I could be that person, I said quietly. And that was it. A simple declaration. No grand gestures, no fireworks, but it was enough. That night, he held my hand as we walked through the park. It wasn't the first time we'd held hands, but it felt different. It felt like we were both stepping into something bigger than just the two of us. Every evening after that, we would walk through the park or sit in his studio, talking about life, about dreams, about everything and nothing. It was simple, but it was everything I had ever wanted. And then there were the small moments, when he would gently tuck a loose strand of hair behind my ear, when I would catch him staring at me when he thought I wasn't looking, the way he would smile at me after a quiet moment, as if we shared some secret no one else could understand. But even in the quiet, there was an unspoken truth I knew deep down. We both carried our pasts with us. He had lost people he loved, and I had lost pieces of myself in the pursuit of something I wasn't sure I understood. We were both searching for something, but I didn't know then that what we were searching for would lead us to a place I never expected. As time passed, the relationship between Ethan and I seemed to grow deeper. But, as is often the case with love, the closer we got, the more we started to fear the things we couldn't control. We had talked about our future many times, about the possibility of building a life together. But there was always a shadow hanging over those conversations. Neither of us had truly confronted what it meant to stay. One evening, when the air was crisp and the stars glittered above us like 1,000 tiny promises, Ethan looked at me with a mixture of hesitation and resolve. I have something to tell you, he said, his voice serious, unlike his usual easygoing tone. My heart skipped a beat. I could tell by his eyes that this wasn't going to be just another one of our late night talks about dreams and adventures. Something had changed. "I'm leaving the city for a while," he said quietly, almost as if the words were hard to say. I froze, my heart suddenly feeling like it was caught in my throat. "What do you mean? Why?" He sighed and rubbed his face, looking troubled. "My mother, she's not doing well. I need to go back home for a bit. She's been sick for some time, and I can't keep pretending like everything's fine here." I tried to swallow the lump in my throat. "How long will you be gone?" "I don't know," he admitted, his gaze softening. "A few months, maybe longer, but I'll come back, I promise." I nodded, though my heart felt heavy. A few months. A few months could feel like a lifetime, couldn't it? "Promise me you'll be safe," I whispered, trying to smile even though the pit in my stomach kept growing. "I promise I'll be back, Nora. I'm not leaving forever." And just like that, with those words, he kissed me goodbye. A kiss that should have felt like a promise. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something would change. That distance, both physical and emotional, would begin to grow between us, no matter how hard we tried to hold on. The first few days after Ethan left, everything felt like a dream. The city, which had once seemed so vibrant and alive, now felt quiet. The places we used to walk through together felt empty without him. I found myself passing his studio, hopping to see him there, but it was always locked up tight. He called me the first day he left. "I miss you already," he said, his voice softer than usual. "I miss you too," I replied, trying to sound stronger than I felt. But with each passing day, his calls became less frequent. At first, it was once a day. Then, every few days. After that, it was just a message every so often. The messages weren't enough. They were short, sometimes vague, and it felt as though he was drifting further away with each word. It hurt more than I ever imagined. I started to feel like a part of me was fading as well. There was no longer anyone to share the little moments with. The small things that had once felt so meaningful, like walking in the park or sitting in a cafe, became meaningless without him. I began to wonder if he was thinking of me at all. Was he okay? Was he missing me the way I missed him? Or had he found something or someone that was filling the space I had once occupied? The emptiness became harder to ignore. It settled in my chest, a constant ache that I couldn't shake. Days turned into weeks. And then, one evening, as I sat on my couch, staring at my phone, waiting for a message that never came, I realized something. I was no longer waiting for him to come back. I was waiting for a part of myself to return. The part that had been lost the moment he left. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of the end. Weeks turned into months. I would check my phone several times a day, hopping for a call, a message, anything that would tell me he was thinking of me. But nothing ever came. The calls had stopped altogether. The messages grew fewer and further apart. There were no explanations, no goodbyes, just silence. I began to return to the places we had gone together, as if somehow they could bring him back. I would sit in the park we used to walk through, or visit the cafe where we had shared so many conversations. I imagined that somehow, if I kept doing the things we had done, I could summon him from the past. But it never worked. The silence grew louder, and the memories began to fade, too. It wasn't until one rainy afternoon that I truly understood how far he had gone. I had just left the office, walking toward his studio, hoping foolishly, perhaps, that I would find him there. But when I arrived, there was a man standing in front of the door, locking it up. He looked at me as I approached, and I felt a strange chill. "Is Ethan here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The man shook his head. "No, he's not here anymore." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "What do you mean? Where is he?" "He moved away," the man replied, his face impassive. "He's not coming back." Those words hit me harder than I expected. The finality of them. The truth I had been avoiding for so long. I didn't cry, not immediately. I just stood there in the rain, feeling like the world had stopped turning. Everything that had once been a part of my life now felt like a distant memory. A dream I couldn't quite grasp. I turned away, my heart heavy with something I couldn't name. That night, I sat in my apartment, the walls feeling colder than they ever had before. I couldn't stop thinking about what the man had said. Ethan wasn't coming back. I wanted to believe it was just a lie, a misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew it was the truth. It was strange how a promise could disappear so easily, how something once so certain could fade into nothingness. I went to bed that night, clutching my phone to my chest, unable to sleep. I replayed our last conversation over and over in my mind. The words he had said, the way he had looked at me, the promise that he would come back. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized his absence was the answer. There was no coming back, not for him, not for me. I didn't know what to do with that knowledge. But I knew one thing. I would have to let go. And so I did. The days that followed were a blur. Each morning I woke up, but it felt like I was moving through a fog. Everything was muted. The colors outside my window, the sounds of the city, everything felt distant, as if I were watching life from behind a glass. The silence was the hardest part. Ethan's absence was not just a physical one. It was an emotional void that I couldn't fill. I tried to move on, to busy myself with work and activities that had once brought me joy. But the truth was, nothing could replace the feeling of his presence. I began to go through the things he had left behind. There were little reminders everywhere. A book he had lent me, a scarf he'd left in my apartment after one of our late-night walks. It was strange how much a person could leave behind without even realizing it. I found myself going through our old messages, those early conversations that felt so light and easy. The jokes, the shared moments, the plans we had made. I read each message slowly, savoring the words, even though they now felt hollow. They were just words, after all, and promises, empty promises. One day, I found the last message he had sent me. It had been a month since I had last heard from him, but I had never deleted it. "I'll come back, I promise." I stared at those words for a long time, unable to tear my eyes away from the screen. The promise that had once meant everything now felt like a cruel reminder of what was lost. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream and shout that he had lied to me. But I couldn't. All I felt was this overwhelming sadness, a sadness that I had no idea how to deal with. But as the days passed, something began to shift within me. I couldn't stay trapped in this cycle of waiting. I couldn't live my life constantly looking over my shoulder, hopping to see him again. I had to move on, even if it meant accepting that some promises were never meant to be kept. I began to clear out the things he had left behind. I packed away the books, the little trinkets, the notes, everything. But I kept one thing, the last painting he had shown me. It was the one of the river at dusk, the one he had always said captured the stillness in his soul. I couldn't part with it. It was the only thing left that felt like a part of him still existed in my life. I hung it in my living room, not as a reminder of him, but as a symbol of something I had lost, and something I was learning to let go of. Time, they say, heals all wounds, but I don't believe that. Time doesn't heal wounds. Time just allows you to grow around them, to live with them. You don't forget the pain, but you learn to carry it. Months passed, and slowly, the weight of the past started to lessen. I stopped waiting for Ethan's return. I stopped looking for him in every corner of the city, in every street we used to walk together. I stopped hopping for messages that would never come. I started to live again. I began to write again, something I hadn't done in a long time. I realized that writing had always been my way of making sense of the world. And slowly, my words began to fill the spaces that had once been filled with silence. I took trips on my own. I visited places I had always wanted to see. I started meeting new people, people who didn't carry the weight of my past with them. And slowly, I began to feel like myself again. But even as I moved forward, there were days when the memories of Ethan crept back into my mind. There were nights when I would lie awake, remembering the sound of his voice, the way his hand felt in mine, the way he made me feel safe. But I learned something important during this time. It wasn't about forgetting him. It wasn't about pretending that he hadn't mattered. It was about understanding that sometimes people come into our lives for a reason, even if that reason isn't forever. I had learned so much from him about love, about art, about life. And even though he had gone, I realized that those lessons would stay with me forever. And one day, as I stood in front of the painting he had left behind, I realized something. I had stopped waiting. I had stopped looking for him. And that was okay. I didn't need him to come back because I had learned how to be whole on my own.